I am very grateful to be the chair of banking for New York State at the Senate level. I am very grateful that my chair at the Assembly level is also here, Assemblyman Pichardo. Never has the world needed a public bank more than it needs it now. We have just gone through two pandemics, the immediate one of COVID-19 and the longer term one of racial and economic inequalities. Both of these things call out for a new way of looking at money, a new way of looking at how do we use the people's money to do the people's good. The president of the Public Bank of North Dakota is here. It's a joy to speak to you again, sir. You and your bank have inspired so many, whether we speak about the market meltdown of 2008, which you guys did not suffer, or we speak of the PPP fiasco, which you guys did not suffer. Now that's saying something, and we should learn from that. But greater minds than mine are going to speak on this, and I'm going to hand it to my colleague, our Assemblyman, our new chair of banking, Assemblyman Pichardo.
Mr. Chairman, thank you so much. Again, my name is Assemblymember Victor Pichardo. I have the honor of representing my neighbors in the West Bronx, and I'm looking forward to hearing, particularly from Mr. Hardmeyer and many people who are experts in this space, to understand how can it work here in the state of New York, how can it benefit my constituents, how can it benefit my neighbors, and how can we potentially move this economy forward and rethink how this economy can work in a post-COVID world here in New York State.
And I have Dr. Amara Enya, who will introduce our citizen presenters.
Thank you so much. I want to definitely thank Senator Sanders for being here, as well as everyone who is joining us for this town hall, the Public Banking Institute for the tireless work that they've been doing on this issue for years, and for this moment that we're in that's really exciting because of the opportunities that it involves for really transformative change in our economy, much needed change, especially in light of everything that's happening with the pandemic and what a vision looks like for rebuilding our communities moving forward. So I'm excited to be here. I'm excited to co-moderate with the great senator and our distinguished guests.
Well, thank you. It's been fascinating to listen to the presenters. Let me just by background tell you a little bit about myself and a little bit more about the bank, and then I'll get into the specifics of the Bank of North Dakota. As was mentioned, the Bank of North Dakota has a history of 100 years. We were created as part of the progressive movement that swept at least the upper Midwest back in the 1900s, early 1900s. North Dakota was led by a very charismatic individual by the name of A.C. Townley, who gathered up groups of disgruntled farmers, was successful in creating a third political party in the state of North Dakota called the Nonpartisan League. They gained control of the legislature and then passed sweeping industrial resolutions that created not only the Bank of North Dakota, but it also created what is now known as the State Mill and Elevator, which is the largest single mill and elevator in the country. Along with that was what is now called workforce safety and insurance. So at the time, 100 years ago, some of the discontent that I'm hearing in New York, it was similar to what we were experiencing in North Dakota. Deep disregard and skepticism of the big, large money center banks, the big elevators, out-of-state entities that really, I felt at the time was controlling North Dakota's destiny. And so that really was the idea of this progressive movement, was for North Dakota to take control of its own destiny by creating its own ability to lend money and by the ability to market and add value to grain. And so here we are 100 years later. I have been personally at the bank for 35 years. I have been president of the bank for 21 years. When I came to the bank in 1985, it was about a $600 million bank. Today, we are about an $8 billion bank. We have set record profits for the last 16 years. 2020 was not as successful because of issues, as you all are aware of, but it was still the top 5 most successful year that we've had. Our mission, 100 years ago, remains as it is today, and that is to finance economic development throughout the state of North Dakota. So that's our primary mission. And with that, we are giving a lot of latitude to creating programs and to work with the business community and the banking community to really hone in on how those are best met. So let me describe a little bit about how the bank works and some of our responses, how we think about economic development, how we go about doing it. And also let me just say at the very front end of this, I will not advocate publicly for this model, although I have spoken to at least 30 to 40 different states. I've been to numerous states talking about this. I find that this is a contentious issue wherever I go, the idea of a public bank, and I leave it up to the local jurisdictions to find out whether this is something that they are interested in going forward with or not. So I will not advocate, but I will educate. And for North Dakota, many of you know, is a red state with a very socialist institution, the Bank of North Dakota and the Mill and Elevator. Would they be created today? Maybe unlikely, but I think that we have now become such a part of the state and such a part of the economic efforts that you would be hard pressed to do away with the bank. In my course of 35 years, I have seen a couple of attempts to stop the bank, to turn it back over to the private sector, but it largely doesn't go anywhere. Because I think, as you'll hear me describe, it is really ingrained as part of the state of North Dakota and our history. And the fact is, it works. It works very well in our state. We have a unique model that may not be the same model that other states choose to implement if they go forward. But for BND, it works, and it works well. Our model really is, in addition to financing economic development, we also operate as what's called a banker's bank. And that is, we support the local banks. One of the stats that I saw earlier was we have more banks per capita than any other state. And I think largely that may be in case because of the Bank of North Dakota and our ability to help those businesses and those banks leverage the Bank of North Dakota and leverage our assets to go forward. So what is a banker bank? Basically, just like individuals, banks need access to banking services as well. So we do normal things that a correspondent bank would do. We clear checks for our North Dakota banks. We do safekeeping. We do bond accounting. We do Fed funds clearing. We provide liquidity to banks. We provide them Fed funds lines. Earlier it was mentioned Fed funds are Feds sold by the Federal Reserve to banks. We do the very same thing for our North Dakota banks. We buy and sell their liquidity from them. And we have found that over the course of our history, we've grown very close to our North Dakota banks. And in fact, they serve as our delivery channel. The Bank of North Dakota originates very few loans outside of a robust student loan division. Most of our lending is done in participation with the local bank. We believe that economic development is driven locally. Those banks certainly know their customers, know their businesses better than we do. And so what they do is they work with their customer, utilize the Bank of North Dakota's programs, of which we have many that they can choose from. We have programs to help entrepreneurs start up. We have programs for middle market, and we have programs for large Fortune 500 companies that are looking to come to North Dakota or to expand in North Dakota. So we do a little bit of lending in each area. We determine what those areas are by continuing to understand the economic landscape of the state of North Dakota. We visit with economic developers, we visit with bankers, with state officials to really understand what are the needs in North Dakota. How can we serve those needs? One of the things I was asked to respond to was, how did we do during COVID? What did the Bank of North, what was our role? And I would tell you, similar to what we saw the firefighters do, after 9/11, that's how Bank of North Dakota thinks of itself is we rush in to where the disasters are to see where we can help. Most banks would take a very hands-off approach, a very conservative approach, kind of let the dust settle, figure out where they should play. B&D, on the other hand, because of the unique nature of what we do, that we are instrumental, I think, in the success of our economy. We are used to really getting in, rolling up our sleeves, finding out what the needs are, and then meeting those needs. Now that doesn't mean that we're not going to do our homework. In the case of COVID, we offered 3 different programs to small businesses outside of the PPP program. We recognize, having dealt with financing disasters for 30 to 40 years, that there is a role for the bank. But what we didn't want to do, and what we will not do, is duplicate efforts. If we understand that the federal government, the SBA, FEMA has a role to play in providing assistance to local businesses, we're not going to come in and duplicate that effort. Instead, we're going to see where the gaps arise and seek to fill those. So that is really our mantra is to be patient and to understand where the needs are so as to be as efficient as possible. I've been asked to talk a little bit about infrastructure. The Bank of North Dakota is a state agency on top of being, a state-owned bank. So I am the head of an agency, the Bank of North Dakota. I go to the legislature every 2 years when they meet. I present a budget that gets approved. And along with our programs that we develop on our own, we also have state-initiated programs that legislators may devise and ask for us to work on. Infrastructure has become a significant part of our growth of the state as we've gone through several energy boom and bust cycles, building out our infrastructure, whether it's roads, buildings, or water projects, flood diversion. B&D plays a role in administering, billions of dollars worth of programs to the state. We also act as the state agency's bank. So we will provide liquidity to other state agencies that need it. Our Department of Emergency Services knows that if they need quick access to money, overnight, we can get them money to meet their needs. There's a lot of different directions that I could go. I'd be interested really in answering questions that you may have. I know that there are some questions that I get in every one of these. And let me just answer a few of those off the bat, and then I'm happy to take questions. You know, first of all, are we FDIC regulated? Are we insured by FDIC? The answer is no, we are not. We're not regulated by any OCC, FDIC, any entity at all. In fact, we are examined by the state Department of Financial Institutions, but they do not have any authority or exercise power to do any types of mitigation at the bank. How are we funded? Well, the Bank of North Dakota is unique and different from other states in that we have what's called a treasurer that is very weak in its duties that it has compared to other states. By law, all deposits collected by the state, all income tax, all fees, all sales tax is automatically deposited at the Bank of North Dakota. Those become our core deposits. That becomes the nucleus of our funding and how we have the ability to make loans to other entities. We also have access to the Federal Reserve. We are a member of the Federal Reserve. We are a member of the Federal Home Loan Bank. We have the authority to issue bonds if need be. But we have, at this point, sufficient liquidity and alternative funding sources to fund all of our needs. We also, because of our profits, we are able and willing to provide what's called a dividend back to the state. So every 2 years, we get into a discussion with the legislature on what might be an appropriate amount of our income or our dividends to transfer back to the state. Today, we are contemplating a 50% dividend philosophy, which means that 50% of our dividends could be transferred to the state. 50% of our profits, I should say, could be transferred to the state. The rest is built for capital growth. And today, the Bank of North Dakota enjoys a strong capital position of 12%. Our return on equity is upwards of 15%. It's been as high as 22%. And so with that, why don't I stop, answer a few questions, and we can see where it goes from there.
It's great to be talking to you, Eric Hardmeyer, our hero. And it was a great presentation. Thanks, everybody. So you said that if an agency needs liquidity, you provide it. What interest rate is that, and is that a loan, or what are the terms for that
Sure.
sort of loan?
Yeah. So it would be really what we use as an index for state agencies is we use the Fed rate. Today that's 1/4%, and we mark it up some to meet our overhead costs. So state agencies borrow at a rate from us somewhere in the neighborhood of 1.25 to 1.5%. I should say that not only do we provide a low interest rate to state agencies, but one of the other things that we do is we are and have been in the student loan business. We believe that education is a important part of the evolution of the state of North Dakota, the economic development of the state of North Dakota. And so we have provided student loans to our residents since the early 60s. In fact, we were the first bank to make a federally insured student loan in the nation. And today, you've heard of SoFi. The Bank of North Dakota actually was the first to offer a total student loan refinance program. And today we lend money to student loan borrowers at a rate of 1.75%.
Wow.
Yeah, and so they have options of fixed or variable rate. So yeah, the nature of the bank, its low cost of money, is something that we do utilize to encourage economic activity, and we do, you know, provide that to our borrowers as well. We just simply take our cost, add something for overhead and profit, um, and get the money out as you know, inexpensively as we can.
And where do you get the liquidity? Do you get it from the Fed? Do you get it from the Federal Home Loan Bank, or you just got it there in your deposit base?
Well, today, along with a lot of other banks across the country, banks today seem to be flush with deposits. But as I said, our nucleus of our deposit, our core deposits, come from state tax collections, income tax, sales tax, fees. But we do, as I said, have access to the Federal Home Loan Bank, the Federal Reserve. Our banks today are flush with liquidity. So they are selling us their excess liquidity. We have $1 billion of deposits from other banks on our books today.
Well, thank you so much, President Hardmeyer. I just wanted, as we're looking to pass the legislation in New York State to really enact public banks on
Sure.
state municipal levels, I wanted to give the opportunity for the electeds that we have on the call to ask you some questions, since you know how to get it done. I have State Senator Jabari Brisport.
Eric, thank you so much, by the way. You know, fascinating that you took the time to be with us over here in New York. But I guess I'm curious how, if any, interaction, the Bank of North Dakota has with private banks that exist, what the competition is between you, and how you navigate that.
Yeah, that's the critical part of our success is, when you think about the bank and its 100-year history, I would say that, we were maybe one of the originators of the triple P model, the private-public partnership. So our whole model is built on partnering with banks, not competing with them. So the economic development loan programs that we have are all done in participation with a local bank. So the local banks originate the loan, service the loan, and sell a portion to us. And typically what we will do then is, we will reduce their risk into any one venture, allowing them to leverage that relationship, make more loans available. It allows that bank to operate at a size and capacity of the Bank of North Dakota. Some of them may have a legal lending limit of, $1 million, but because they are participating with us, they can access our full lending capacity, which on a bite-sized transaction would be in excess of 150 million. So we think of the banks as our partners, and they are our delivery channel of our programs and not our competitor. And I think if you look at, one of the 2 or 3 hallmarks of what has made B&D successful, it is that model. It is the fact that we're not going to compete, for their customer. That's their customer. They have the relationship. They know them. We have no interest, no desire to have a direct relationship with that borrower, and think it would be counterproductive towards, the model. And, if we ever get backlash, it's because we may have entered into an area that does, compete with the private sector. A few years ago, we entered into the mortgage space. After 2008, 2009, there were underserved areas of the state where they just simply could not get a mortgage. So B&D went to the legislature with the backing of our trade institutions and said, you know what, this is an area where the Bank of North Dakota can play. We can make mortgage services available in rural parts of the state that just simply don't have access to the market. So they now are able to get a home mortgage loan at the same rates of anybody else in any other community, using the Bank of North Dakota as, the originator in that case. But we did it, with the full backing of the banking association. So it's a very mindful strategy to work with the banks and not compete against them.
Mr. Hardmeyer, really appreciated. The traditional private banks are leaving. Is there a model either similar or within North Dakota that does that kind of stuff to sort of either create the space that maybe a credit union for whatever reason can't keep up with, or that the private sector has sort of just simply threw their hands up in the air and abandoned?
Well, yeah, so that's a really good question. So as we've thought about the bank, you've heard me describe our economic development efforts. But what we, really are not is the retail bank. And I think that's what you're talking about. So you can't come to the Bank of North Dakota, for example, for a car loan or a boat loan or, a personal loan of any kind, other than a student loan. So, we've set that aside and said, the private sector for the most part is handling that. We are just really interested in, what are the gaps that we can fill, and certainly, business startup is a huge area of interest for the state of North Dakota. We are, primarily an energy and ag state, and we go through the flows of commodity prices, and it's feast or famine in North Dakota. And so what we have recognized for literally decades is that we need to diversify North Dakota's economy. We need to have programs that help entrepreneurs start up businesses, because that's the lifeblood, and that's what I hear you talking about in New York as well. It is really the opportunity for entrepreneurs to get access to funding. And not only do we run, our own, loan programs, but we also have a venture capital arm where we have the ability to make, equity investments into businesses as well. And we're mindful that we're not investing into a company directly and turning around and lending to, a company that we bought an ownership interest in. So, it's an interesting model that we run. And I'm sure, as I've mentioned, every state, if they choose to go down this path, will have something unique for their state. What is it that you're trying to solve? If you start with that idea first, what are the problems? What are the gaps? What are you trying to solve, rather than trying to be everything for everybody? I think that gets you where you need to be. And the biggest pushback that I've always seen is the pushback from, the trade associations, from the banking communities are afraid of, unfair competition. And so, we've really structured the bank in a way to eliminate or diminish as much as possible that opportunity to compete with the private sector, but rather to help them meet their needs.
The one of the concerns that, and again, when I was president of the State of New York Mortgage Agency, and also heading up New York State's Minority Business Program, and then New York City's Minority Business Program, has to do with the lack of access to capital, particularly in the Black community. And it is something that, and in working with Senator Saunders and his staff, we obviously tried to focus upon. It's not obviously not just the Black community, but historically and systemically, the Black community in any type of initiative winds up being in the lesser mode. My question for you, Mr. Hardmeyer, I know there's not a large Black community in North Dakota, but I would imagine the largest non-white community would be the indigenous people who live in North Dakota, and who are always living in what's now North Dakota. And the question that I would have is, are there any special, targeted, but I don't want to say special, any targeted initiatives that the Bank of North Dakota has been able to develop to provide some focus there, because that might give us some guidance as to how a public bank here in New York State could perhaps follow best practices that you've adopted over these many years.
Well, thank you for that question. Yeah, over the years, we have developed programs that were, encouraging, our Native American reservations to take advantage of economic development programs. And really what we found is a opportunity of North Dakota businesses who are looking for labor. The reservations are, suffer a lot of problems with unemployment. There's health problems that you would have seen on many of the reservations around the country. All of those have plagued North Dakota as well. But where we have worked is to develop programs that encourage businesses to work 1v1 with the Native American populations to access employment opportunities. We have lent, many times to the tribes themselves for manufacturing facilities, manufacturing opportunities. And I would say that it's not so much a singular effort to work on the reservations, but more of a statewide attempt to bring us all up rather than just segments of our population. But again, we found that, it's economic development is all locally driven. We can put the programs out there, but there has to be local initiative. And that's what we've done. So we've worked separately trying to get liquidity onto the reservations. We have found that they still continue to be underbanked and underserved, and are willing to work with CDFIs or whatever the nature of that lending entity might be to provide our credit where we can do the most good. So to answer your question specifically, is there a targeted program to help minority and Native American populations? The simple answer has been there has been, but today it's more of a statewide effort to help the state as a whole.
Ms. Donovan, I just have a follow-up question, very brief one, which is, in another life, I worked as an investment banker and worked actually with the Navajo Nation for a couple of years, which of course is one of the largest in the country, and its asset base is a lot larger than many that you might find in North Dakota. But what I was hearing you mention has to do with employment and consumer issues. But on the business development issues, is that something that you've been, obviously in some ways, the indigenous people would have to initiate that, but is there some way that you might be able to, the Bank of North Dakota might be able to encourage that? Again, I'm asking the question not just with respect to North Dakota perspective, of course, but how, when we will have
Right.
a public bank in New York sooner than later, how that bank could follow your best practices.
Well, yeah, it's a complicated issue. Lending on the reservation is, takes a little bit of a unique experience to do that. Many of them, of course, have their own sovereign immunity. What we've really asked for of the Native American community is to adopt, the commercial uniform code, so that lending practices can be done on a basis that are fair and equitable across. And so, that is one of the issues. I've been president of the Native American Task Force, part of the Banking Association, to really work hard to develop more liquidity, more programs on the reservations. And it really starts with, understanding the unique needs, getting, some adaptation of the Uniform Commercial Code so that banks can understand, the lending methodology in which they're going to work on reservations. And that, I think, has been the largest single barrier to liquidity on the reservations, is really the adoption of the Uniform Commercial Code. And once that happens, I think capital goes to where there's a return, and you will see opportunities arise on reservations. I've dealt with it for 35 years, trying to work diligently to make that available. But it's not easy. I'll just freely admit that. More can be done, more should be done. And it's a problem that needs to be solved.
Could a union meet their banking needs with a public bank? For example, if they wanted to divest from a Wall Street bank? I guess a similar question was, does the Bank of North Dakota have access to the retirement funds of state unions?
Of course, the way I started this is that what works for North Dakota may be different for other states. And so, if there's a place for, the unions in New York's state banking model, I would say that's certainly a call that each state would make on its own. So, we don't, although we have the only public banking model in the country, certainly I think what's going to come out of this are many different types of applications of this model. So what may be right for North Dakota may not be right for New York, and vice versa. So, I think that would be something that each state has to wrestle with on their own, what they want it to be. In terms of accessing, pension funds, no, we do not. We do not have readily access to the state pension funds, although the Bank of North Dakota has in years past administered certain parts of their fixed income portfolio where we have managed that for them. In one case, I will tell you that the state of North Dakota has put together what is called the Legacy Fund, and that is today, the state of North Dakota receives 10% of all revenue, oil taxes that are collected come to the state of North Dakota. That is collected by the Legacy Fund. Today, that's about an $8 billion fund. When that started, all of those monies were deposited at the Bank of North Dakota. And so we quickly outstripped our ability to handle a deposit of that size. But most of those funds, the legacy funds, the state pension funds, are managed by professionals outside of the state. And it is an area of, I guess, quite a bit of discussion in terms of, just as you've brought up, why are all those fees being paid to out-of-state hedge funds, pension funds, professional managers, when North Dakotans could manage some of those funds just as well. So it is an area that we are discussing as a state today.
Eric, I did want to ask you a question. Here in New Jersey, the big pushback is that the State Banking Association, all the bankers said, we're against it. We're going to lose our municipal deposits, even though we told them that it's not in the bill. But that is one thing. In North Dakota, despite the being flush with deposits, our municipal deposits shunted into local banks.
Walt, that's a great question and a good point to make. I was in New Jersey a couple years ago and spoke to the New Jersey Bankers Association. And, you know, it was not well received by the banking association. They were polite and cordial, but I knew, you know, up front that I was in hostile territory. And it largely was around that particular area of municipal deposits. When the Bank of North Dakota was created 100 years ago, all municipal deposits and state deposits were legally required to be deposited at the bank. In the early 1930s, an initiated measure was passed that eliminated the requirement of political subdivisions to have to deposit their monies at the bank. And so, yeah, the New Jersey bankers were really upset about that particular issue. And I said, well, look, that's not how it works in North Dakota. You know, we're not after the municipal deposits. We know that's a big source of income for community banks for deposits. We're just not simply going there. We have enough with the state deposits. So it was a point of great contention with the New Jersey Bankers Association.
I want to underscore the fact that this is a collaborative effort, that we're here to support these efforts in states across the country. And also what you've gotten from a lot of the comments is that we have the ability to actually craft this in a way that makes sense, that rises to the challenges of this moment. So while we have the privilege of being able to speak with President Hardmeyer in person about the experiences and his knowledge and expertise from North Dakota, and you have folks who are parts of coalitions from across the state. But one thing is that it really does become what we make it. And so we have the ability to really craft, whether it's at the state level, a public bank, or the municipal level, to really craft a system that meets the challenges of this moment, but also one that is aligned with the values of the kind of society that we want to build. And that is more evident now than it's been in the past. As we've seen with COVID, it has really simply unearthed or brought to light issues that are longstanding, inequities that are longstanding, communities that have been marginalized. It really has just exposed those in a way where we cannot ignore them. I want to defer to Senator Sanders, as I know we have limited time, but I wanted to underscore what Walt is saying about the Public Banking Institute being just really in the trenches in this work and willing to support and assist these efforts throughout the state of New York and elsewhere around the country. That's what we are here to do. And obviously there are a lot of questions that we could not get to in this town hall, but that just means that there's a need for more spaces to have these conversations and to make sure that we get those questions answered. And of course, we're willing to help with that.
Well, we just want to say thank you to everyone for joining us tonight. We hope that everyone found it informative, and we're looking forward to everyone partnering with us to get a public bank done for New York State and New York City. And over to you, Senator.
My friends, in order to win, we're going to have to hold hands. We're going to have to get away from your comfort zone, speak to people in North Dakota. I mean, come on. Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you all.